So I will say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone who's joined us today. It's a pleasure to have you here. My name is Bashar Ahmed. I'm the CEO of Shabaka. We are a research and consulting organization focused on diaspora and humanitarianism. You probably might have joined us in the previous one. So today's webinar is the third and the final one of our series on webinars on diaspora and humanitarianism, which is a collaboration between Shabaka, IOM, and ADEPT. It's an absolute pleasure to have you all here. We have fantastic panelists, and I think we're going to have a really interesting discussions today. It's on diaspora humanitarianism, so it's on intergenerational engagement and leadership. Without further ado, because I would love to actually leave as much time for the floor and everything, I will actually hand over to Tanya from IOM, and she can introduce the topic in more details. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Bashir, and good afternoon also from my side to all our participants and in particular to our panelists. My name is Tanya Dedovic. I represent IOM, the International Organization for Migration. I'm based in Cairo, in Egypt, so I'm basically overseeing activities related to labor mobility and human development in the what we call MENA region. And yes, we have, for obvious reasons, as you can imagine, in the MENA region, we have, I think, some of the most traumatic humanitarian situations that the world is currently grappling with. And so the topic of diaspora and humanitarianism was very much born out of the context that we are working with here on a daily basis. And in particular, it was the situation in Lebanon that got us started on this series of webinars. Now that has actually developed into quite something different from what we envisioned in the beginning, and today is actually the third in a series of webinars. And today we will examine, and that's why it's really fantastic to have the speakers that we managed to get on board for this webinar. We will talk about the different motivations and approaches from diaspora to engage in humanitarian crisis. The one that we are facing globally, such as COVID-19, but also crises that are maybe more particular to specific country contexts. And from the speakers that we are going to hear from today, you will hear something about the generational differences in supporting humanitarian development, how to prevent crisis, how to recover from crisis. Our panelists represent different diaspora organizations, and they will, all from their different perspectives, they will discuss what are the gaps in the current humanitarian system and how they can be overcome. But we will not only talk about diaspora engagement in actual humanitarian situations and how to overcome crisis. We will also talk about what are the motivations from diaspora to engage during and after the crisis, and how second and subsequent generations from diaspora engage in their countries or regions of origin. And for that reason, we have really a wide range of different diaspora organizations, those that really engage in humanitarian situations, but also those that come in, let's say, long after or even before a situation turns into a crisis, and who support development. And that's why we have, apart from the speakers on Birthright Africa and Puso and Restless Beings, we also have the African Diaspora Network in the US, who will also share some of their experience working with second and subsequent generations of diaspora, and how what they see is their role in addressing situations before or after a crisis, because they don't really engage in humanitarian situations as such, but with the work that they are doing, they very much can share some experience on transnational diaspora engagement, and they can also, I think, provide some good examples on how to work with the younger diaspora generations. So in that sense, I'm really looking forward to this discussion today in our webinar, and to hear a little bit more from the different speakers about this potential of intergenerational diaspora engagement. We were really thinking quite a bit about the topic for this webinar, and I think this topic and of intergenerational engagement is going to keep us busy for a bit longer. But this webinar will certainly make an important contribution to all get us started to think about this, and to learn more about what are the different contributions that diaspora can make in making this humanitarian development peace nexus. Everyone coming in from a different perspective, in a different context, but taking it all together and looking at it all together, I think we can learn a lot from these different approaches. And as I said, I think we will also hear something about diaspora leadership and how diaspora can actually challenge the way things are done, the business as usual, both in the humanitarian but also in the development sectors, and how diaspora can contribute to what we could call maybe a localization agenda. So with that, I think I'm going to hand over to Paul, who is going to moderate our webinar. He has truly proven himself in moderating our webinars. So we are very lucky and happy to have Paul with us. Please, Paul, the floor is yours, and you lead us through this webinar. Thank you. And I hope you will all enjoy the discussions today.
Thank you so much, Tanya, and especially for the kind words of introduction. As Tanya has said, I'm Paul Asquith. I work at Shabaka, where I'm Research and Advocacy Manager, and I will be moderating the discussion today. We've got some fantastic panelists, speakers, who I'm very interested to hear about their experiences and their perspectives on these topics. Before actually I start, some basic housekeeping. After the panel discussion, we will move to question and answer, and you'll have an opportunity to ask any questions of the panelists that you would like. But if I could please ask you to put any questions you have into the question and answer box, that would be much appreciated. And then I will ask the questions of the panelists as they come in. So, with no further ado, let me introduce our first fantastic speaker, Walaa Sheikh, who is co-founder and CEO of Birthright Africa, which is committed to providing free educational trips to Africa for all young people of African descent in the US. She has over 16 years of management and leadership experience in both the private and public sectors, and has spent the last 10 years supporting various college and career readiness initiatives in both the K-12 and post-secondary education spaces that prepare students with skills required in the 21st century global economy. Walaa has served as interim executive director, program director, internship coordinator, and strategic consultant to small and large educational nonprofits in NYC and Washington. And she has received an MBA in strategic management and social entrepreneurship from Indiana University after working as a financial associate at Goldman Sachs. She participated in both the Education Pioneers and the Management Leadership for Tomorrow fellowships, and was selected as one of the most influential people of African descent in 2018. She was born in Sudan and raised there, as well as in Sweden and Uganda and New York City. And she currently lives between the US and Ghana, which is where she's joining us from here today. So we're very lucky to have you with us here today, Walaa. Over to you, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Paul. And I'm glad you could go over some of my professional background, so I didn't have to go too deep into it, but I think elements of what I'll be sharing will definitely come through. You know, it's such a fascinating and complex topic, but I am so excited about it because when I first learned of this work that Bashir was doing around diaspora engagement and intergenerational components of it, it told my life story. Like I was able to literally tell my life story and connect it all the way to why I do the work that I do. And there's so much that's happened in the last couple of years, not just the health pandemic as a humanitarian crisis, but what I would love to really frame in our brains as the humanitarian crisis of racism, and how we as Birthright Africa are part of that conversation in how, the types of problems we're trying to solve for the diaspora. And I can connect that to my personal story. So at a high level, I'll just share that, when we think about Birthright and why we exist, there's this huge disconnect, right, that has happened over centuries, really, beginning with enslavement and colonization and all the remnants of it throughout these last few centuries. And a big part of that has been obviously legislated policies, but also the establishment of economic systems that maintained this inequality based on color of skin, based on race, ethnicity. And we're still grappling with it today, right? And what does that do to the diaspora that is of that descent? What does it do to the diaspora of African descent when this is the narrative that's really been promoted, this propaganda, if you will, of the crisis in Africa, but where does it really come from? A lot of it is sometimes placed on us, not having the right political, democratic, economic system. But where did those systems that structured the country setups today come from? And so we have to take it back to like the moments where I learned from my father, right? So let's go into the intergenerational piece. For years, my dad has worked in the UN. That's the reason I came to New York City. My dad used to be a diplomat for the Sudanese government. That's why I got to live in Sweden for 7 years as a child. Then in Uganda for a couple of years, went to an American international school. And in between, we were living in Sudan. I went to like a British school. And therefore, I had this very global sense of who I was, more so than probably just being Sudanese. And for me, the world was my oyster and the world was accessible and everything was just based on this access. Until we have, if you will, the political crisis of the Bashir government coming into power circa 89, 90, a military coup to take over and establish this Islamic military rule in Sudan. So ousted are all the diplomats that lean democratic, including my father. So here we find ourselves in that crisis, and that ultimately meant my dad had to look for work somewhere else. It was between Kuwait and New York. Luckily, he chose the United Nations, work in New York, because 2 years later, 1992, Kuwait is invaded by Iraq. So a lot of upheaval there, right? Crisis in my background that as a child, you don't know any better. I wasn't really exposed to it. I was from the northern part of Sudan, not the southern part, which at the time was fighting with each other, but we didn't really feel that. So to me, as a 10-year-old about to be 11, going to New York City was just like, oh, here we go. We're just going to another country. I don't see that this is crisis. To me, this is just, we're following my dad. It isn't until decades later that I'm learning and understanding what the true history of African people, Black American people is. At that point, I'm in my 20s in America. And how the scramble for Africa, from the Europeans created these political structures of countries and nations with multiple tribes and multiple ethnicities in one country. And therefore you get all of that civil strife and civil war. Because at that point in my 20s, I was on the American dream, and I've gotten this access to a place of opportunity and, you know, that true immigrant aspiration. You can work hard, get your education, get a job, and you got it. And that's what happened. I got my college degree in finance, got to enter Wall Street, one of the top banks, Goldman Sachs. I thought I was set. I'm about to achieve this American dream. And, you know, Africa is this place with problems that my family escaped, right? We had to get political asylum from. That's not a place I really see myself living, connecting to. You know, America's about assimilation and reducing sort of these other identities so that you can make it. That was really what was going on. Because there's all this crisis in this place called Africa. So I'm buying into that narrative. And then at the same time, not understanding the narrative of the humanitarian crisis that has been plaguing America since its inception. And arguably right now, you know, we're going through that battle. If you are paying any attention to the political strife in the US outside of mask mandates and COVID vaccination, the brutality against Black, Indigenous people, and what the true history of America we are debating. Do we start at 1776 or 1619? There's been a whole project around, let's talk about the true founding of America on the back of the genocide of Indigenous people, the enslavement of Black people, and the economic rewards that have been reaped by those that were in power, namely white men. So here we go, fast forward, I'm getting the 2-minute warning. I'm finding myself in America thinking I have made it. But when I show up every day to work, I am one of a few people of African descent. And I begin to question and I begin to doubt, why are there so few of me? And what does that mean about me? Am I perceived as a leader and as someone who's capable and able to contribute? At the same time, I don't realize I'm going through these microaggressions, right? And feeling these internalized oppressions, doubting myself. And I learned about this idea of learning your history and culture as a way to have a foundation of pride and confidence. And learn about these opportunities that others in other communities are getting through a birthright, learning their history and culture for free, 10 days. There's a group called Birthright Israel, there's Birthright Armenia. And so it dawned on me, why are Black people getting this birthright experience to learn who we really are and who we've been in history as creatives, as contributors, as innovators of all kinds of technologies and systems throughout the history of time from the very beginning. Because with that frame, I, one, would not disassociate from an Africa that I see as crisis. And also, would it look to succumb to that doubt of who I can be in a system that arguably still wants to maintain racism, but there are ways to ensure that it does not get me, for a lack of a better word. And so Birthright Africa was created ensuring that that connection to who I really am, who we are as people of African descent. And we've been doing this since 2017 with our first partner, the City University of New York, to make sure young people don't internalize the crises that they see in the media from Africa. Also, don't internalize the crises that they experience every day of racism in the diaspora, to limit their possibility of who they can be. And thereby, what we see ourselves doing is creating this generation of global leaders that are proud of their heritage, confident in their innovative aspirations because they understand they come from a history and a present day legacy being built by leaders and entrepreneurs of African descent even today, and therefore have also that connection to a continent where business innovation and the future is clearly already here, right? In all the new ways of financial systems like cryptocurrency, but also just your opportunities. There's so many opportunities given the amount of concerns and issues we still have of the remnant, but not to succumb to that as a negative narrative, but to feel an aspiration to collaborate as diaspora with our brothers and sisters on the continent, knowing that they have been struggling with those remnants of colonization. There are obviously many differences, but the crises bear some similar systems, right? When you look at even things like the apartheid system versus the system of racism, my understanding when I was in South Africa was the apartheid system was actually built based on how the segregation system was set up in the US. So when you understand the commonality too of this African descent, not just in the struggle, but in the possibilities of leading, managing, and owning our creativity and our innovation, in addition to reparations that are still needed and required, we will feel that ultimate sense of possibility to lead and be a part of and reap the rewards of our economic, reap the economic rewards of our creativity and innovation. And so I'm so excited that Birthright Africa is here to bring that type of understanding to the world in this global identity of Blackness and African descent, and what it means for us to be put in those positions of leadership and ownership to truly move the world in the direction that it needs to. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Wilaya, for your fantastic comments. I was particularly struck by how well you captured some of the real challenges facing the development humanitarian sectors, especially the need to acknowledge the histories of racist and colonialist structures on especially African diaspora experience, but also how these inequalities continue to shape the world around us. I also very much like the point you made about the need for the diaspora to resist pressures to internalize certain discourses, particularly around the global south, and something I'm sure you'll be very familiar with. But I saw a headline, I think it was in one of the US papers last week, to do with the African Cup of Nations. And the headline ran, amid coups and COVID, and as various people pointed out, you could have replaced the US with that in the Super Bowl and have been factually accurate. So there's something interesting about how countries in the global south, and particularly those affected by crisis, are framed by the media, by popular culture as well. So I could have listened to you speak all afternoon. I'm sorry to have to cut you off. But if it's okay, we'll move on to our next panelist. We're very lucky to have here is Mabroor Ahmed, who is founder and director of international human rights movement, Restless Beings, which is a British charity and a human rights activist organization, as well as an alternative news agency. And Mabroor has led this organization with its unique voluntary-led structure, refreshing campaigns and creative approach. And Restless Beings has been very successful in attracting change makers from across the world. And in particular, Restless Beings have been spearheading Rohingya and South Asia diaspora refugee experts, speaking at international symposiums and university conferences, as well as facilitating mainstream media into Burma. So we're very lucky to have you here today. Mabroor, the floor is yours. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Paul, and thank you to everyone at Shabaka, ADEPT, and IOM for inviting me for this very timely discussion. Thank you for the introduction. Very, very quickly, I'll just build on that before I go into the main part. So we, Restless Beings, we're, if you like, an international human rights organization, and we find ourselves in a in between two worlds, if you like. One, which is the humanitarian response, and that's the role that we play as a UK-based charity, but also as a human rights organization. So that takes our work through 3 A's really: activism, academia, and advocacy. And today I'll kind of speak to you from a bit more of an activism and an academic approach. And of course, like I said, we do quite a lot of advocacy work towards different governments around the world as well. I just wanted to say what a fantastic opening discussion by Wala, and I echo everything that she has already mentioned about systemic racism, which puts people of the global South in an unfortunate position to begin with. My small contribution today will basically focus on a couple of different communities that we work with. As Paul mentioned, we do quite a lot of work with the Rohingya community from Burma, but also we have many other projects, and I'll be discussing the Rohingya project, but there's also a project we have in Assam, in Northeast India, where many people are facing the denial of their citizenship, as well as in Tigray, in Ethiopia, where there is an ongoing genocide. And I think when the discussion topic came up of intergenerational diaspora-led humanitarianism, the first thing that struck me almost immediately, being almost like a grassroots organization, was that a lot of the time, many communities who find themselves and face difficulties in their existential living, whether that's as a refugee migrant or as a genocide survivor, often don't feel that safe speaking with the larger organizations. And a lot of that has got to do with simply just not being A, heard, B, being part of an agenda which is kind of predetermined, I suppose, from governmental organizations and diplomatic ties between nations. And so, of course, I appreciate organizations like IOM and the different UN bodies and the fantastic work that they do. But our kind of existence is to almost be that bridge for communities to be able to kind of alert us to their first grievances, discomforts, and hopefully we can be the bridge that gaps between a community who is facing difficulty and the development world, if you like, and the multi-million and billion-dollar industry that it's that it is. Speaking about the Rohingya very quickly, touching on that because that's our flagship project. When we first started working on the case of the Rohingya in around 2008, 2009, we found that most of the diaspora who were leading, if you like, calls for international justice and accountability, even from that stage, were generally of the elder generation, and they were the spokespeople, mostly male, of course. They were the spokespeople of the Rohingya community in Burma, and also the Rohingya community in diaspora in many places like Bangladesh, Malaysia, India, and Saudi Arabia, as well as, of course, the smaller pockets of diaspora communities in places like the UK and the US. And one of the very first things that struck me as the 2017 genocide was unfolding in front of our eyes and across news screens was this kind of lack of voices of people from a diverse background. So firstly, very few females speaking about this issue of Rohingya descent, but also very few young people speaking about the Rohingya issue on a mass scale. And one of the bits of work that REST is being set about to do from about 2012 onwards, so this is maybe 5 years ahead of the 2017 genocide, right through to today, was to really kind of use our, if you like, platform as an international human rights organization to bring on board different diaspora communities especially from a young age, from a younger gene pool, if you like, and to really give them the tools and the resources that they would require in order to be able to advocate for their community, whether that's within a localized setting, whether that's in an academic setting, whether that's in an advocacy setting to governments. And a lot of our work was focused around, firstly, kind of an understanding of history and being able to pass on that history to the younger generation, because what we often found was in diaspora communities, and this is not just alone for the Rohingya, is that the elder generation who may have been, you know, firsthand victims of some sort of abuse, generally were trying their utmost best to kind of keep the younger generation protected from this, and almost create an existence which was based on the host country that they were now staying in, and a degree of acclimatization, and you know, kind of furtherance through education, through workforce, etc., and not so much focusing on advocating for the original community, for the Rohingya community that we found. So, you know, I can give you a very clear example. There was a family that I met in London in 2012, and the father was, like I said, you know, one of these Rohingya activists, and speaking across different types of media and different types of advocacy channels. And he had 4 children, and all 4 of those children, aged between kind of 12 and 18, were largely kept in the absolute dark about the situation of the Rohingya, the history of the Rohingya. And so when we started our training program, if you like, for young activists, there was a massive disconnect between the understanding of the young people and the reality of what the Rohingya had gone through for the past 40 or 50 years. So like I said, the very first stage is kind of you know, giving a contextual background to that. And then the second steps and third steps after that are really looking at, okay, so what is the humanitarian situation? How can we, you know, use our different advocacy channels, firstly for the humanitarian differences that we seek to employ, and then from there onwards, really, well, how do we use the channels available to us in terms of our, you know, governance and our democratic institutions to be able to voice the concern for the Rohingya on a larger scale, almost on an international advocacy scale. And the similar sort of thing we're seeing within the Tigray community, where a lot of the younger people are focusing heavily on the humanitarian settings and the humanitarian response, whereas the elder generation are generally focusing more on the international diplomacy efforts. And really, that gap still exists till today, and I think it will exist for communities who are going through these moments, simply because there is, and referencing back to what Wallah had said, simply because there is a lack of structure for young people in diaspora, firstly, to be able to become active in the cause of their people, but secondly, even just being sheltered away from some of the reality and some of the history that's lived and that's real, and rather, you know, this is often, you know, kind of blanketed over by notions of some sort of Orientalism when we look back at Global South countries. I have a lot more to say on this issue, but unfortunately, I think my time is running out, and perhaps we can pick up some more discussion points in the Q&A. Sorry for overrunning if I did at all, Paul.
Not at all, Mabrur, and thank you so much. Again, I'm very sorry to have to cut you off. It's always a pleasure hearing you speak, and I think you've highlighted really well 2 key issues for me that are of relevance to the topic under discussion today. One is the way in which the diaspora action, both in humanitarian and development settings, is not unidirectional. Yeah, it's not just between origin country and settlement country. As Restless Beings really neatly demonstrates, there's a lot more transnational action going on within diasporas and between diasporas. But the other point that I think is very relevant to our discussion today is to do with the different resources that different generations within diaspora communities can draw on and do draw on, but also the need to identify and nurture diaspora leadership, particularly for young diasporans. So no, thank you so much, Mabrur, and I'm hoping we can unpick some of these issues further when we move into the question and answer session. Also, just a reminder to our audience, please feel free to post any questions you have to the question and answers box at the bottom, and then I'll be very happy to raise them with our panelists very shortly. However, before we get to that section, we've got our next and final panelist, certainly not our least panelist. We're very lucky to have here today who is Robert Banet, and please forgive me, Robert, if I'm mispronouncing anything today, who's founder and chief executive officer at the Puso Foundation, which is an international non-profit organization established in 2017 and registered in 2018 in Virginia. Puso is an acronym that stands for the Purposeful Unconditional Service to Others, but the word Puso is also a Tagalog word that translates into the word heart. And since its inception, the Puso Foundation has directly served over 50,000 lives around the globe through the support and involvement of its local and global volunteers, its college outreach program, and its corporate sponsors. So thank you so much for joining us here today, Robert. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining. Thank you for IAM for hosting and inviting me to be here. I'm going to go ahead and just share my screen really quickly, give you guys kind of a visual of our organization. It's usually the best way to kind of understand who we are. So essentially, we are known as the Purposeful Unconditional Service to Others, also known as Puso. Puso is a Filipino word that's translated into the word heart. So we're also known as the Heart Foundation. A little bit about myself really quickly. I'm 27 years old. I'm based here in Washington, D.C. I'm also the founder of a digital media firm called All Pro Reels, and then I'm also the founder of a charity called Puso. So a little bit about Puso. Our mission statement is to provide hope with a purpose, and we do this through multiple ways, and you'll kind of see that through some of the videos I share. But essentially, we're an international 501c3 nonprofit organization that was founded in 2017. Over the course of the last 5 years, we've been able to graciously touch ground in 7 different countries, beginning with, if you see some of the pictures here, top left, that is Liberia in Africa. Top right is El Salvador, which is in South America. Bottom left is Ethiopia, which is also in Africa. Bottom right is the Dominican Republic. And as you kind of see with the different shirts, with our logo being Puso, we try and change those colors into the countries we're serving. So you can kind of see how we've incorporated that, and it usually gives that touch to the local leaders that we're working with on the ground, the different organizations that we partner up with, whether they're orphanages or just different places where we're touching these kids and touching the communities around these areas. It's always a nice brand uplift, but also an opportunity for us to kind of partner up and get back. With that being said, I have a quick video here, and all my videos are just a minute long. Just want to kind of show you a glimpse of what we've done in our works here. So here's a quick video from our program director who led the way. And before I show the video, the topic here is potential for good when we bring our resources together. And essentially with our Diaspora group and with our leadership on our team, we have multiple folks from different countries, and we try to utilize their background and where they're from to try and touch new areas. And the leader here, his name is Tillman Dunbar. He was able to go back to Liberia, his home country, with his family. And I'll play the video right now.
Liberia. Super excited to be here in my home country, giving back to where it all started. If you don't know yourself, you go lost you. If you get money, you go trust you. I'm nobody only know I trust you. Nobody go rest you. God help you keep you. Nobody go rest you. Nobody go rest you. I'm gonna go confess you. Your head to go correct you. You know go forget you. So you get the consent. Tell you watch out when you go. Watch out on the roof. Watch out for them hyenas. Watch out when you go. Watch out on the roof. Watch out. Go round in all the places you go to. Stand your ground and stay solid like.
And to kind of just touch on that, really going on with this is love has no borders. And for us as an organization with a lot of youth, majority of our team members are under the age of 30. We try and use our creativity, try and get back. And it kind of jumps into our next thing here is over the course of the last 5 years, we've been able to serve over 100,000 different lives in multiple different ways. And it's been an awesome opportunity to do that. But we do so in different ways. And another part of our relief efforts is helping out those who have been impacted by natural disasters. And currently right now, our main focus is actually in the Philippines, where Typhoon Odette had recently just hit an island called Siargao, where we had been doing a ton of work in. And their lives have been basically, devastated overnight. It happened 5 days before Christmas this past year. So working with local leaders, and it hasn't been the easiest of the process because the majority of the island's actually down from there's currently no electricity, no way of kind of really connecting with anybody. So we've had to use, local leaders that we've met around the Philippines to travel down there and to be able to get approval to be able to provide care packages around the island. And it has been its difficulties, but being able to serve and actually get there and be on the ground and be successful in that sense has been amazing. A little bit more about us. We're made up of 22 different executive team members. All of us, as I mentioned, are under the age of 30. We're all 100% volunteer based. All of us work full-time jobs in different careers, whether that's in tech, STEM, nursing, medical field, politics, photography, videography, and we use all of our talents to try and get back and put together these creative ideas. And my next topic here is the power of youth leadership. I really believe in empowering others, especially those that are younger, that have great ideas, that want to, and they just don't know how to give back. They don't necessarily have that bridge to give back. And here's another example of some of the work that we've done. Essentially, it was called a Puso mobile grocery store, which we brought to people that have been affected by COVID-19. Yeah, so essentially what you saw there was we were able to give away Puso. It's almost like Monopoly money, and we gave each family 500 pesos, which is equivalent to a certain amount in USD. And they were able to go ahead and shop, and we had different stations for them. So there was a meat station, a grocery station, fish station, noodles. There was a face mask station, and even a free giveaway station. So really just using our creative ways to try and get back and inspire. As I mentioned, we're 100% volunteer based, and all of us use our skill sets to give back. But at times it is draining. At times it is tough to kind of manage your full-time job, your career, your family, and to focus on charity. However, I really believe that there's an importance to giving back, specifically back to your own country. And as a Filipino diaspora, we do a lot of our focus work in the Philippines, and a lot of that has to do with kind of inspiring the next generation of leaders. And I really feel like there's a potential for good when we bring all of our resources together. So here's another quick video of what we did this past Christmas.
In celebration of Christmas, here at the Puso Foundation, we are doing it with the year 3 of Rapid Love. Feels good to be here with you. Merry Christmas! Home for the holidays. The fire's warm, we got nothing to do. So grateful that we're here. Home for the holidays. For that holiday cheer. Merry Christmas! It's quiet night. So let's pour another drink and watch the world turn white. Thank you to your generous hearts, we were able to deliver gifts to over 3,000 children and parents this Christmas.
Merry Christmas from the Puso Foundation!
Awesome. And then it's just one of my last points here. As mentioned earlier, we do have a college outreach program, and this is really dear to my heart. I really believe that there is a bright future, a lot for our future generations, especially for those that have been, who have grown up here in the States that have never really been back to the Philippines. So we really target a lot of the Filipino organizations at these schools. So we travel to these different schools, kind of giving speeches, giving our inspiration and showing them our journey. And I really believe that there are a ton of diaspora students who have not necessarily know connection to the Philippines, but they realize the importance of giving back. And here's a quick 1 minute video of our recent trip to the University of Urbana-Champaign in Illinois.
You know, I guess it is true what they say. Things really are better the second time around. At least I know that's how we feel about being invited back to the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana. It probably has something to do with the fact that our family came back a little bit bigger and a little bit stronger.
That's okay, cause we hope.
Which goal wasn't so apocalyptic. I try to spread my message to the world the best way that I can give it. You can be wrong if it's you doubting. With the faith of a mustard seed, you can move mountains. And only the Heavenly Father can ease the hurt. Just let it go and keep praying on your knees.
Yes, I am hopeful for today. Take this music and use it. Let it take you away. And be hopeful, hopeful, and he'll make a way. I know it ain't easy, but that's okay, cause we hopeful.
I believe a wise man once said, when you know better, then you do better. It takes each one to teach one to come together. You know, I guess it is true what they say.
Awesome. And with that being said, that concludes my presentation here. That's our website right there, our Instagram page, if you'd like to stay in touch. I'm looking forward to the rest of the panel.
Thank you so much, Robert. Really inspiring to learn about the work of the Puso Foundation and just to see the breadth of activities you guys are doing as well. So thank you for sharing that with us. And thank you to all our panelists for their fantastic presentations. They've given us so much enriching stimulation to inform the discussion, but also hopefully audience members as well. And I can see a few questions are starting to come through, which is fantastic. So, however, before I move to open questions formally, I wanted to open the floor to Megan Hunsberger, who's joining us here today, again from the US, from an organization called ADN, which is African Diaspora Network, where she's programs and digital manager and runs ADN's African Diaspora Investment Symposium and Impact and Innovation Forums. So please, Megan, the floor is yours if you want to make a statement from ADN's perspective on the discussion so far.
Thank you very much, Paul. And yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about what ADN does. And to the panelists, thank you for your presentations. It's really inspiring to hear about the work that you're doing. And I just would like to share with you a brief PowerPoint here on ADN, as well as a perspective on the diaspora. So the African Diaspora Network was created by our founder, Almaz Nagash, originally because she realized that there were not a lot of Africans and diasporans in conversations about Africa at the table, and she really wanted to open up the conversation about all the good stuff that's happening there and how to support Africa. And at ADN, we have 4 strategic directions: education, healthcare, connectivity, and finance. And we touch on those strategic areas in our key programs. 2 of them are conference series, the African Diaspora Investment Symposium and Impact and Innovation Forums. And 2 of those are entrepreneurship programs. Builders of Africa's Future supports entrepreneur startups in Africa, and Accelerating Black Leadership and Entrepreneurship, or ABLE, supports Black entrepreneurs in the US. And I wanted to touch a bit on the opportunities and challenges in diaspora economic recovery. So minority enterprises, they start off with underlying wealth disparities. Black families make 10 times less than the income of white families. And also because of this, there's less capacity for them to bootstrap their businesses to family resources and capital. And also only 1% of venture-backed businesses are Black, at least in part because of unconscious biases on part of investors and pattern recognition. But despite these disadvantages, there are also a lot of opportunities. The minority entrepreneurs have managed to create 4.7 million jobs in the last decade. And there's a lot of opportunities there for us to support Black-owned businesses whether that be through buying, investing, or mentoring. In ADN, our way of supporting Black entrepreneurs is really through our ABLE program. And through the ABLE program, every year, we select anywhere from 10 to 15 Black entrepreneurs to receive enterprise training, mentorship, and they also have then a platform to pitch to potential Silicon Valley investors. The African Diaspora Network, our office is based in Silicon Valley, which is a really good touch point for entrepreneurs to be able to get in contact with investors. And when it comes to philanthropy and the role of remittances, with COVID's appearance, we weren't sure how the remittance outlook would look. But even despite of COVID, the diaspora in 2020 sent $540 billion back home. And that is really significant and shows their commitment to families. And at the African Diaspora Network, we really encourage this. And we also try to encourage our network to give beyond family, also to the different startup initiatives going on in Africa. With job creation, according to the UN population report, by 2050, Africa will be home to 2.2 billion people. And this will really require a lot of enterprise growth when it comes to food supply, healthcare services, and education solutions. And this is a really good opportunity for the diaspora to explore business development on the continent. And then also on the flip side, given the right resources and support, African entrepreneurs really have an opportunity as well in entrepreneurship because they have the unique position of knowing the needs of their community, up close and personal. And with intergenerational leadership, we have found that the entrepreneurs that go through our program, particularly the Builders of Africa's Future, there's a lot of focus on social impact and solving problems in their community. And with this, one of the reasons we have mentorship as one of our pillars with our Builders of Africa's Future program is it's so beneficial to them in their work. They really enjoy the other aspects of the program, but time and time again, they have voiced how important mentorship is, not only from people the same age as them, but also, as we mentioned throughout this panel discussion, through people that are older than them, different generations, different perspectives that really help to push forward the work that they're doing in Africa in the communities that they live in. So if anyone wants to know more about ADN, I'll put my email in the chat. Feel free to reach out and to learn more. And I really appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Megan. And I think you've actually highlighted two very important points in terms of our discussion here today. One is the need to take a broader view of diaspora contributions, not just to humanitarian response, but also to development response. And something that's always music to my ears, as colleagues will know, is what's in technical terms called the Humanitarian Development Peace Nexus, which kind of looks at all the different phases before a crisis, for example, resilience building, crisis response, but also post-crisis recovery. And I think you highlighted very neatly that the diaspora have a really important role to play, both in emergency response in terms of crisis, but also in terms of driving forward recovery post-crisis. And I think that's especially true in the context of COVID over the coming years, especially in locations such as Africa, where most African economies rely heavily on the micro or small or medium enterprise sector to generate most of the jobs that are going to be needed to support that development in those countries. And the diaspora are very important investors in that sector of origin countries' economies. So no, thank you. And also the focus on mentoring and nurturing the leadership from the next generation of diasporans. So I think that's very relevant. Thank you very much. Right. Well, I can see lots of questions coming through while we've been speaking. If it's okay, I'm going to start with a question from Odette that was originally for Robert, who's the Puso co-founder, but I'll ask the question to Robert, but I think it's also relevant to all our panelists. So, Robert, how do you mobilize resources to fund your activities since you're 100% a voluntary foundation? Most diaspora organizations and networks rely very heavily on voluntary contributions, and we've all got different experiences. But Robert, over to you.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah, all of our proceeds are basically fundraised here in the United States. We try and make it an interactive piece, right? So with our mission statement being hope with a purpose, we believe that hope with a purpose doesn't just apply to those that are living in underserved communities or in places that have been hit by natural disasters, but hope with a purpose goes to those that are in the States who have the opportunity to give back. That gives them hope. And I've seen it in my own life, through my executive lives. Our lives have changed as we've given back, right? So with that being said, we host 5 different events in the United States. It's like an annual charity basketball event, annual football tournament. We do an annual New Year's Eve gala. So at the end of the year, we bring everyone together. It's like a red carpet affair. And instead of celebrating at a random bar with some random people, you're celebrating with purpose, and you're bringing in the new year in style, but also in a way of you're going to have the opportunity to really give back this year. And just basically using our private events and our network around us to fundraise in person, but then we also have like online platforms where we're able to use, online gatherings and using our use of social media and digital media to really promote our work. And that's another reason why we use a lot of photo and videos. We want to be able to show the transparency of our work, but also inspire folks to want to get back.
Well, thank you, Robert. And again, really interesting example of just how effective the diaspora can be at mobilizing resources for both development and humanitarian interventions. Even though, and be interested to get your and other panelists' reflections on this, sometimes it can be hard for the diaspora to mobilize large amounts of resources at scale. This is something that we've seen at Shabaka. So for example, if there's a crisis in Philippines or another world region, the diaspora are very generous and they give a lot. But they're not generally structured, diaspora organizations and networks, to mobilize large amounts of money and or relief supplies very quickly, like some large international humanitarian agencies. Yeah, but I'm going to ask this same question to some of our other panelists, if that's okay. Maybe I will pick on next, Mabrur, if that's okay. What are your views on this question of fundraising and the voluntary nature of a lot of the work that Diaspora is doing?
So, yeah, I think it's a great question. I'm sure, like Robert and many others, we are constantly underfunded. So we're constantly trying to pull out our passions to try and make money available for some of the work that we do. And it's absolutely relevant here, I think, to mention that, and this is where really diaspora comes in. Where a diaspora, so for example, with the Rohingya, we found that we didn't really have any difficulty fundraising because there was a lot of people here in the UK and abroad who were either very close geographically or spiritually to the Rohingya project. And so therefore, we were able to draw on lots of resources from the British Bangladeshi community here, as well as the British Muslim community here. Fast forward a few years to very recently, for Tigray, for example, Tigray is a much more difficult project for us to fundraise for, simply because there seems to be like a lack of understanding sometimes of the actual issue, but also the diaspora is not nearly as connected emotionally. And so when there is a disconnect emotionally to a project, it becomes far, far harder to fundraise. And so then we have to go to various different kind of methods, similar to what Robert just mentioned, kind of having different events and galas that might bring people through for some other reason, not necessarily just to raise money for a charitable cause. So it might be putting on a good night, and then having people coming through almost as an entertainment thing and being able to fundraise in the same way. And there are challenges, and I think I speak for many of us, that's a challenge that we face constantly.
Thank you, Mabrur. Again, this is a really interesting point, and I'm going to ask the same question now to you, Wilha, but also want to pick up on, this is a point that perhaps Mabrur has touched on, which is Are you or the people in your network driven by causes rather than a particular geographical location? What motivates or inspires people to contribute?
So this is a very interesting question, especially in the way that you framed it. And I love that you did, because I wanted to point out the definition of diaspora for us at Birthright Africa, because we are a diaspora-facing organization. We are headquartered in New York City. That's where I grew up. I am bicontinental, so I'm back and forth because it's about connecting youth and young adults with these free educational trips to the continent. But the diaspora are youth and young adults that live in the US. And so when it comes to the motivation, it's definitely a geographic reason. And it's a geographic region that is broad. So when we think about the African diaspora in America, it is Black Americans, it is Afro-Caribbeans, it's Afro-Latinx, it's continental Africans like myself. And so it's not one particular area of Africa, it is all of it, because that entire history is that connection to the history and the legacy and the innovation and the business that is happening. We're all disconnected from it because of all the reasons I mentioned in my presentation. We don't get the education in our school systems at the depth, and now there's actually an attack in a lot of ways of the learning of the history of America and just global Black history. And this is where it becomes intergenerational. It is that older generation of African diaspora that understand now the need to make sure that is being taught, that are galvanized to give at not only an individual level, but also the philanthropic foundation, corporate level. So if they're sitting in a position of leadership, they will connect us to the corporate foundation that they work with. And so I am proud to say, for example, Goldman Sachs employees and the foundation work there has been able to support us, right? Through the firm-wide Black network for the Black employee. They are motivated by this idea of connecting youth to the continent and ensuring that pride and confidence so that they become these leaders in the future. Because essentially the humanitarian crisis in America is a leadership crisis. This panel just actually helped me understand that, by the way. I've just gotten another level of clarity in the work that I do. And beyond that, what we really bring to the table, what I thought about as a systemic fundraising model is Birthright Africa is not doing this alone. We are actually helping education partners build Birthright programs in-house that they run and also co-fund 50%. So the funding also comes through this systemic institutionalized approach. And these are mostly leaders and educators of African descent themselves that are motivated. Most of the time, they are also an older generation, have also benefited by going themselves to the continent on their own and understand intuitively what that does for you as an individual. So it is a full prong approach, and we're really excited about the scale and sustainability.
Oh, sorry, I'm still learning how to unmute myself after 2 years of Zoom calls. Thank you so much for that. And I think you've also touched on a really other really important point, which is how we engage young people in the diaspora effectively. And I'm going to ask this question to our other panel members, what's worked for them? I'm going to start with you, Robert, if that's okay. What's worked for you when it comes to engaging younger people within the diaspora?
Yeah, I think for me, especially with our college outreach program, I myself, just 4 years removed out of college, just showing them that you don't have to have $1 million or have a successful career just to give back, right? You can be just yourself. Anyone has the opportunity to make a difference in this world. And it doesn't have to be to a certain degree. It could just be, opening the door for somebody, saying hello, messaging somebody who you haven't spoken to in a while. And it starts with that kind of chain reaction, right? And as you fall into that deeper, that initial feeling of giving back just changes you in some way. It gives you some type of perspective. And I think that leading to my second point is perspective. A lot of our students are in college. They're frustrated about exams. They're frustrated about having to get up for 8 a.m.s, right? And seeing what others are going through around the world. In the Philippines alone, I know so many that had to go through COVID without learning at all because there was no such thing as a Wi-Fi or a laptop or a smart device, right? They had to learn over the phone. I've heard a lot of stories from a lot of people that we help. They had to learn over the phone, and even that they had to pay certain bills and they weren't able to do that. So kind of just giving them that perspective is key, inspiring them in that sense. And I think naturally when you hear those stories and you're impacted in that sense, you know, your heart just gets pulled to that and you're naturally inspired to want to give back.
I mean, maybe I can ask a quick follow-up question of you, Robert. And I think this is the question about how we engage young people comes from Galina in the Q&A box. What structures do you think are helpful for engaging the younger generation of diasporas?
And as far as structures, is there any particular?
Well, is it about having a fellowship program? Is it about having a really well-structured program of activities? Is it about having, for example, you know, a good online campaign?
Yeah, I think for us, what we do, and with each group is different, right? We work from schools from Penn State to University of Urbana-Champaign to USC in California. We adapt to their culture. We adapt to, you know, what kind of activities they have going on campus, and each group is different. All of them will fundraise in different ways. So one will have like a charity gala, one will have a pageant show, one will have, you know, kind of a dare to donate type of event. So really we structure based off of them, and with each meeting it's beyond just the giving back. It's a two-way street. So not only what they can provide us in terms of resources, but what can Puso provide you? How can we help out and make a difference in your own community? Because once again, Hope with a Purpose is a two-way street. It's not just about what they can give to us, but what we can do to them to impact their lives.
I very much agree with that, and this is music to my ears, Robert. Mabrur, how about yourself? What are your thoughts about how to engage young people in the diaspora, and what structures might be helpful to do that?
So I think, how can I explain this? How can I answer this question? I think politically, Restless Beings as an organization, we don't necessarily like to go and speak to a particular diaspora and then try and harness that diaspora's voice. For us, it's really about harnessing everyone's voice and harnessing everyone's ability to be active and to advocate and to access academia. Again, kind of referencing back to what Wala mentioned before, that those establishments are not made easy for people of the global South, or to be honest with you, anyone right now, even in the US, even in the UK, it's almost impossible for anyone to access that, especially when you start looking at class divides. Then you really start seeing difficulties. And then of course you have your racial divides and you have your global South divides on top of that. In terms of how do we garner that to the best of its ability, I think, you know, recently, I'll give you a very, very recent example. Just last Monday, we had 12 people who came in for a volunteers orientation. And you know, one of the very important things that we do when we recruit volunteers and team members is to say, basically leave your certificate papers of education at the door, leave your years of experience at the door, because we don't want to replicate models which have persecuted the communities, the very communities that we have been trying to somewhat save, according to the white savior mentality. We don't need that methodology. What we need is absolute fresh approach, absolute compassion, absolute kindness, radicalism of two sorts, radicalism in the first essence of a fist up, radical action and being able to want to see a change coming about, and how do you garner that voice from within a person, but more importantly, having a kind of arms out, you know, feel from the heart, radically love, radically be compassionate, to be able to change people's personas and perspectives. Because I think when we're talking again about the instruments that persecute a community to such an extent that they need state or you know, extra state intervention in terms of humanitarian response, you really have to look at how did that happen in the first instance, and that instance has to always come back to the infrastructure which allowed that to happen. And the only way that you're going to be able to change that infrastructure is to be able to change the masses, and the only way to change masses, like I said, isn't through fists up, is through radical love. And so that's really what we base our entire training program on. And I know it sounds very airy-fairy, and I know it sounds up in the clouds, and I know it sounds very tree-huggery, but that's absolutely what we are. We are absolutely in the clouds. We are absolutely tree huggers, and we absolutely have optimism for humans to change the course of humanity. Because if we don't, then what do we rely on? We rely on mechanisms of whether that's capital or whether that's kind of state level, and they are simply not designed to protect humanity. They're there simply to protect human interest, and that's a very limited human interest of a select few elite anyway. I know that's gone really radical, Paul, and I'm sorry for it, but I can't help but be the person that I am.
No, you shouldn't feel you have to apologize at all, Mabrur. And I'm particularly struck and inspired by the energy and passion that you and other panelists have conveyed with great eloquence and force. And I actually also agree in terms of here we are in the 21st century. We know that humanitarian and development needs are greater than ever before. And this business as usual is no longer sustainable. So we need to have the courage to think in a kind of very open sense and envision what the futures could look like and how we could get there. So no, don't, and I'll say this to the other panelists too, you shouldn't ever feel shy about adopting a strong or radical position. I think it's important to hear these things. The other thought that our panelists' responses have struck with me is an issue of how easy it is or what the challenges are for moving resources, and it's not just about money, but it could also be supplies, to different parts of the world as part of your campaigns. And also the discussion and the points you made around structures and trying to address some of the kind of structural barriers or breaks, I think brings us back really neatly to Wila's opening presentation. So Wila, I'm going to come back to you if that's all right. What challenges have you faced in moving money and material to your different initiatives, and what could help address that? What's worked and what's not worked?
So what's interesting for Birth About Africa, and I think this is a point of clarity, just to emphasize what we are really tackling and what we're moving, is that we are bringing young people from the diaspora physically on airplanes for a 10-day trip for free to get exposed to the development of the continent through business problem-solving opportunity. So the lens is really trying to remove some of the humanitarian aid type of concept, because there's so much of that already, right? And that's great. We need both and. We want you to see, and going back to the question of youth leadership, you may be young right now, but you are a leader today, to Robert's point. You don't need $1 million, you don't need your degree. So moving material is literally moving the body for us. And the major challenge was something like COVID. We couldn't travel for 2 years, right? It was not safe. So we're always thinking about the safety of these young people to go to the continent, get this amazing experience, life-changing. They've told us, every single one of them, that it's been life-changing. They want to go back to the continent. It's reframed what is out here. They can't believe the things that they're seeing in person versus what the perceptions have been in the media, right? And the desire to come back to multiple countries multiple times and feel this sense of opportunity to continue the connection once they return. Because that's the other thing, we got to put them back to the states where they live and rise to the leadership we see for them in a country where only about 2% of people of African descent are in those types of leadership positions. So that is what we're really tackling in terms of the leadership crisis. So for us, the challenge is moving bodies in a safe way. We're returning to travel this year. I'm excited to say, with a partner in Atlanta, and 8 to 10 group this year. And I can report back to you at the end of this year how we do with that question.
Thank you so much, Wila. And again, really great points you've made. Unfortunately, I think there's been some minor sound issues, but we did catch some of your points, thankfully. And I'd like to ask the same question to you, Robert, next, actually. What challenges have you encountered when it comes to moving money, material, resources to particularly crisis-affected areas in the Philippines?
Most definitely. Yeah. And speaking of Walla, what she mentioned about moving physical bodies, I mean, when we do send folks to different countries, the most important thing is their safety, of course, at all times, especially during COVID right now. It's been a little tough to try and do that. But with our circumstances, with how we are based in the Philippines, particularly in the Philippines, for example, for the recent typhoon relief efforts, it's all about kind of building a strong trust within your leadership team overseas. So for me, for example, I'm leading about 25 different members out there alone in the Philippines. So it's just making sure that you have that established trust, and not just, obviously a one project thing. It's multiple interviews, multiple conversations, and building out that trust and making sure that when the money is received, it's being put to use in the right ways. Obviously receipts, transparency, photos, videos, but ultimately, like, you can only do so much, right? You have to have those clear structural processes, but at the end of the day, we're once again working with human beings, so some errors can happen here and there. But I think once again, just being a strong leader, empowering the people that you're working with, and making sure that to your best of abilities, you're making sure you're making the right judgment to make sure that the money is going to those that are really in need.
Well, thank you, Robert. And I completely agree on the central importance of building trust, and also about how agile and adaptable the diaspora have proven in terms of developing what you could describe as trust-based accountability systems, even if they're quite informal, such as sharing information about humanitarian needs, or it might be delivery of relief supplies via WhatsApp. It's a very fast way of getting verification of needs, but also of ways in which their needs have been met. Mabrur, have you got any thoughts on this question? The challenges about moving resources between places, in whatever way we want to look at those resources, material, human, otherwise.
I think for our organization, we have this difficulty a lot because most of the work that we do is in genocide affected countries, right? So this is places where money is specifically not wanted to be able to reach, right? So for example, when you look at Burma, you might look at food crisis in Yemen, you might look at the Chad Basin crisis around Nigeria, Mali, Cameroon, or even in Tigray. And really what's going on is that these the nations that the crisis is taking place in, they actually don't want money coming in. They don't want the resource to be able to reach these people because they're committing a genocide. So they're trying to starve and kill these people. So you have a real difficulty, A, in whichever country you're trying to get the money to, but B, international banking systems are deeply problematic because, say, for example, when it comes to Yemen, the British government, if I was to make any transfer of funds from this country to Yemen, then I would have all of the banking system on my case and probably stopping our bank accounts and freezing our bank accounts almost immediately from this supposed war on terror that they try to castigate across the Middle East and across Muslim populations. So there's a large degree of nervousness to be able to answer this question in a very unsafe setting such as Zoom. But I will answer it in the best way that I possibly can, which is you have to be creative. Just because there is a difficulty in getting money across or getting resources across doesn't mean that that's the end of the line. There are many other ways of being able to do these types of things. And I suppose trying to be safe, you have to think outside of the box to the best of your ability, and that comes through a lot of some of what Robert just mentioned, trying to be able to create the leadership, the networks on ground to be able to access these various pockets of potential ways of being able to get money and food across. If I may, I'll just give you a very quick example of something as well. So, many large international organizations like the WFP, for example, World Food Programme, may recommend a certain one-size-fits-all kind of food pack for refugees, which generally consists of maybe some sort of carb like a rice or a bread or some flour, and some sort of protein come vegetable like lentils or something of that sort. Now, the vast majority of the time, that community that you're trying to access and trying to reach, that might be food that they've never eaten in their life. But there is absolutely no consultation. I see one of the questions has come up on the Q&A. How can the larger organizations support work of smaller organizations? Well, I think the very first thing that we find ourselves in the space between human rights advocacy and humanitarianism and humanitarian response is the ability to have a listening ear. You know, to not think that you know already, to not have a one size fits all, to actually be able to take time to listen, whether that's through diaspora voices or through communities on ground who are suffering, and then be able to transmit that back by whatever means necessary, not necessarily what's easiest for us to be able to do. And I think that's what some of the bigger organizations have a difficulty in. And it's not because they're run by terrible people and who have got, you know, weak hearts. It's because that's the mechanism and that's the scale of response that we're talking about. And sometimes having smaller organizations being able to drip feed that information back and to be able to see, you know, use those networks of being able to access different things on ground is absolutely necessary. But absolutely at the same time, I understand scalability is a huge issue for some of the big organizations.
Thank you so much, Mabrur. Maybe I'm going to ask a similar question to our other panelists. Also, I'm very mindful that time is against us. So maybe, Willa, I could ask you the question, what engagement would Birthright Africa like with institutions, and how could that facilitate it? And also, if I could ask you to reflect in a kind of more general sense as well about the topics of discussion we've had here today.
Sure. Can you guys hear me better now?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, let's try it.
Go for it. So I'm so glad you came to me next, because I wanted to echo on something that Mabrur said around, you know, this challenge of the larger organizations not always getting it right when it comes to a humanitarian situation or human rights. I think it goes back to what I just told you guys about revealing to myself through this panel, how a certain lack of leadership is a crisis within the humanitarian crisis. And therefore, if you don't have the right leaders in place to drive the solutions needed for the humanitarian crisis, you're not really solving the humanitarian crisis because of the leadership crisis. And so that collaboration between large, small organizations, collaboration between diaspora and the place of origin is central. It's probably the biggest takeaway, and also how we at Birthright Africa drive everything. It is one of our 5 core values, along with legacy, wisdom, ingenuity, and can't remember the last one. And so it's this idea that you find yourself in collaboration with the right individuals, but also organizations. To your point and your question, how do we want to be engaged? We want to be seen first as the voice, right? Our voice, our leadership as Black people in every table, at every organization, in every room. You can't have a discussion, especially about us, and to solve problems or, you know, engage us in opportunities of our, you know, in our diaspora and in our places of origin on the continent. And so that would be the first thing. And so that looks like invitation. That looks like, you know, grant proposals that we may not know about, but you know of our organization. So introduce us to those individuals that you know would love the work that we're doing. We may not know about them, because oftentimes part of the marginalization is that we don't have the resources. To ADN's point, I'm connecting with Megan because everything she spoke about is what we're dealing with. So I need all my young people in her ABLE program, because we are accelerating the Black leaders of America, right? And so right now this panel is giving me like just fireworks of who I need to be engaged with ADN, the kind of leaders at Silicon Valley that they're connected to, particularly of African descent, that instantly love the work that we're doing. And so, yeah, it's a two-way street. I can reach out and connect, but also if you as an organization see the work we're doing, reach out to us, whether you're of African descent or not, because we need all allies and accomplices collaborating.
Thank you so much, Willa. Maybe I'll give Megan an opportunity to respond to the point you just made as we're coming near to the end of the session. Megan, would you like to respond at all?
Yeah, we're definitely open to collaboration, and I think that's really pivotal, is just acknowledgement of what each of us is doing, and sharing of resources as well. I'll give an example for our ABLE program. In the Silicon Valley, there's this company called Bill.com, a fintech company. And Amaz is definitely the people person. She has so many connections. And she, through somebody at Bill.com who was working there, they advocated for the work that ADN is doing. And now Bill.com is like one of our largest funders for specifically the ABLE program, because they were all about supporting Black entrepreneurship. So I think networks, connections are so valuable in sharing about the work that each one of us is doing, and finding support there, because everyone has different interests and focus. But like an example, the situation of Bill.com, they really aligned with what we were doing. So I think it's all about just finding who aligns with the work that you're doing in a particular way. So yeah.
No, thank you, Megan. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing about future collaborations between Birthright Africa and ADN. Robert, would you like to kind of make any final comments in relation to how organizations like Puso Foundation and other diaspora groups can work with international organizations, or rather the other way around, how can the international organizations better work with diaspora groups?
Yeah, I think from our standpoint, there's so much work left to do as an organization. We understand that we've accomplished a ton in 5 years, but it's nowhere near what our end goal is. And I think with that being said, having access to international organizations that have been there, that have done it, that have experience, that have stories and things that they have encountered that they failed at, they want to share to us. I think that'd be huge for an organization such as myself, who I don't dedicate, every single day of my life to this organization in terms of hours, right? I do have my own job, my own career, my own family to take care of, and so do my executive team members, which ultimately that's just the result of the reality where we are today. Maybe one day we will go full-time Puso, who knows where that will potentially take us, but for the time being, we only have certain hours in a day where we can work on this, and having any type of aid and advice and things like this conversation alone, I've learned so much. I'm already super excited to connect with some of the individuals on the panel here, and try and partner up and share ideas on how we can collaborate, move forward.
No, thank you so much, Robert. I completely agree. And likewise, I'm really inspired with how we can take these conversations forward, both in a kind of practical, but also in a kind of strategic sense as well. I'm very mindful that time is against us, so I'm afraid we're going to have to draw a close to the Q&A section. I wanted to thank everyone for your time here today, and I'd like to hand over now to our good colleague, Tawheed Pasha from IOM UK.
Thank you very much, Paul. And no, that was absolutely fascinating. I'm going to hand over to Bashar in a bit to conclude this whole series of webinars. This is the last in the series of webinars, and a lot of thanks to the panelists for today. It's been quite educational and very revealing in terms of what the challenges are. And if I can just maybe sum up some of the takeaway messages from my side. There does seem to be an issue when it comes to engaging the younger diaspora, which is the current generation of activists and the next generation, reflecting on what some of the panelists are saying, that there is a lack of diversity amongst the current diaspora leaders. And that focuses on the fact that they come from an older generation. However, there is a disconnect between the younger diaspora and what is actually happening on the ground, the lived experiences of people who are going through humanitarian crisis. So this is where we need to draw upon the fantastic dynamism and the activism, and what I hear is the passion amongst younger diaspora people to do something, to want to do something. And Mabroor, you talk about that sort of the harnessing that absolute energy that people have. It's getting into that. The second thing that I take away is that how do we ensure that larger organizations such as IOM can really engage with organizations on the ground? Because from what I'm hearing, there are gaps and there are pressure points in the humanitarian system. We have access to funds, etc., but we don't harness the energies and the driving force amongst local communities in countries like the UK and the US, and connect them to the needs of what is happening on the ground in other countries. And from what I can see from colleagues online, Robert and others, Megan, there is a real dynamism amongst the younger communities to do something. And something that has come up quite a bit, and while I made this point, is a systematic disadvantage that a lot of the younger diaspora actually face structurally in terms of their starting point. And so their own ability to contribute is hampered not by a lack of will, but a lack of ability to do so because of the external structure. So it's about overcoming those, and it's about devoting those energies in the right places. Super, super interesting discussion. And I'm going to hand over to Bashar now. Thanks.
No, thank you with that. Not a lot to add because it was just so much to learn, and I really appreciate everyone's time. And this webinar series kind of came to kind of like, let's have these kind of conversations and just get different people in the same room to just listen to each other, because this is the only way we can innovate, we can start changing systems and such. So this is, I hope, is only going to be the start. What we're going to be doing in the next couple of weeks is we're going to be having discussion with between the partners, between Shabaka, IOM and ADEPT, to how do we take it forward, some of these learnings from these series. And a lot of points were raised, and Tawheed, thank you for summarizing for this. And I think it was quite important to just kind of raise some of these challenges, but also those opportunities where we can collaborate. So please make sure that you share your details here on the chat for everyone. Follow all the different organizations as much as you can. And I think there's an opportunity to kind of really take some of these learnings forward. So with that, I just want to thank everyone for their time. It was great to hear your thoughts. I really appreciate your time and the learning from this. And I hope this is not going to be the end of these conversations. This is the start. This is where we start. So, and we look forward to it. But with that, I will release you, and thanks to everyone. Much
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Basar.
Voila, Robert, Megan, you know, it was great. And to our partners as well, it's been a pleasure working with you on this series, and I hope we continue it as well.
Likewise.
Thank you, everyone.